Intelligence, Personalities, Traits, and Ways to Work Smarter, written by Jason Hendrickson, narrated by Alex Lancer, copyright 2020, all rights reserved. Chapter 1. What makes somebody more intelligent? One important reason why people could find talking about intelligence awkward is the conviction that it is a thing you are born with, and therefore you can do nothing to affect it. That undercuts social equality and feeds into the very connection between intelligence assessing and tests and eugenics, which still has a big connotation for most people. Still, there is no getting away with the fact that intelligence is acquired to some degree. Researchers found that the IQ of kids adopted at birth bore little correlation with that of their adoptive parents or caregivers, but strongly associated with that of their biological parents. What's more, this association ended up being stronger as the child got older. That's counterintuitive for most people, says Robert Plomin at King's College London, who led the study. They think, as you go through life, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune build up, and ecological differences end up being cumulatively more important because they believe that genes only impact what happens at the moment of conception. And that's not true, naturally. As a matter of fact, numerous studies all point in the same direction. About 50% of the distinction in intelligence between people because of genetics, he says. However, genes aren't destiny. For many years, the quest for particular intelligence genes showed unfruitful. Not long ago, nevertheless, genetic research studies have grown big and powerful enough to identify at least some of the hereditary foundations of IQ. Although each gene associated with intelligence has only a small effect in seclusion, the combined influence of the 500-odd genes recognized so far is rather significant. We are still a long way from accounting for all of the heritability, says Plomin. But just in 2015, we have gone from being able to account for about 1% of the variation to maybe 10%. So, of course, genes matter, but they are definitely not fate. Genes give us a blueprint. It sets the limitation. Nevertheless, it is the environment that identifies where within those limits an individual develops, says psychologist Russell Warren at Utah Valley University. Take, for example, height, another highly heritable characteristic. Children will grow taller if they eat a healthy diet than if they eat a less healthy one, just because a very good diet plan helps them accomplish their full hereditary potential. Likewise, with intelligence. Iodine deficiency at the time of youth is associated with lower IQ, and addressing this in developing countries has increased cognitive abilities. So too has treating parasitic worms and removing lead from fuel. Other ecological influences on IQ aren't as apparent. Cases of abuse and neglect aside, twin research studies expose that the shared family environment has only a really little impact on cognitive capability. Plomin, for this reason, presumes that intelligence has less to do with parenting style than chance. It's distinctive aspects that make a difference, he says. Like the kid ends up being ill or something like that, but even then, children tend to recover to their hereditary trajectory. Chapter 2. What is intelligence and how is it gauged? Reading a roadmap upside down, excelling at chess, and producing synonyms for brilliant could look like three different abilities, but each is thought to be a measurable indicator of general intelligence, or G, a construct that includes problem-solving capability, spatial control, and language acquisition, and is relatively stable across an individual's lifetime. IQ tests compare an individual's efficiency on the test with the efficiency of other people of the same age, usually described as a normative sample. In kids, the score shows the distinction between a child's mental and sequential age. IQ, or intelligence ratio, is the score most widely used to evaluate general intelligence, or G, and typically measures a variety of skills, from verbal to spatial. Any person from any walk of life can be highly intelligent, and scoring high up on one aspect of intelligence tends to associate with high scores in other elements. IQ is the most robust mental characteristic gauged and highly associated with positive life results, including health and longevity, job performance, and adult income. It is also neuroprotective in ways that aren't fully understood. Those with high IQs are at a benefit in handling distressing events. They are less likely to develop full-blown PTSD and more efficient in conquering it when they do, and could experience less fast decrease in the course of Alzheimer's. Can intelligence be enhanced? Some aspects of intelligence can be improved. However, controversy swallows up how to improve intelligence and how much intelligence can evolve. Maybe the most relevant maxim is, just because people can circumvent limits on efficiency doesn't necessarily mean that efficiency was actually without limitations. First and foremost, one critical requirement for intellectual growth is rejecting the belief that intelligence is repaired. Second, the aspects of intelligence that can be improved include processing speed, problem-solving methods, and memory improvement. There's a much lower possibility of improving overall IQ test performance or working memory capacity, a major correlate of intelligence. The abilities practiced in brain training apps aren't readily transferable to either IQ test performance or to solving spatial ecological difficulties, and for this reason have not demonstrable impact on IQ. Are there various types of intelligence? Many of the psychologists see intelligence as one general step comprising a variety of skills, generally determined through IQ tests. In the early 1980s, though, Harvard scientist Howard Gardner proposed that there might be several kinds of intelligence that people possess in varying quantities. These types, of which there are now 9 different ones, include visual-spatial, logical-mathematical, and interpersonal intelligence, among others. According to Gardner's theory, somebody high in social intelligence would likely stand out at complying within a group, while somebody with high levels of logical mathematical intelligence would have a heightened capability to comprehend numbers, patterns, and rational reasoning. However, although the principle has gained steam with the larger public and is typically used in character or work tests, many intelligence researchers dispute the existence of different intelligences and have criticized Gardner's theory, criteria, and research designs. Chapter 3. The best 4 ways to work smarter, not harder. Attempts to increase productivity, multitasking, working longer hours, and remaining continuously tied to technology typically backfire. The harder we work to get more done, the more likely we feel disappointed by our lack of attention period and lowered efficiency. The solution to reduced efficiency isn't that we should try to work even longer hours. Rather, we can take steps to work smarter rather than harder, and we'll get the exact same job done in less time. These 4 easy habits can help you get the most productivity out of the least amount of time and effort. 1. Engage in creative pastimes. The busier you are, the less likely you are to feel you have time for creative undertakings. But research also shows that an innovative pastime can improve your office performance. People who spend time doing activities that stimulate their creativity outside the office perform better at work, according to a study published by the Journal of Occupational and Organizational Psychology. Whether you enjoy visiting art galleries or you like embellishing cakes, creative ventures are connected to an increased ability to recuperate from work-associated stress. And the good news is your creative pastimes don't have to take a lot of extra time. Write some narratives at the time of your lunch break, or swap talk radio for music that influences your artistic side throughout your commute. Your creative endeavors are likely to trigger some creative problem solving in the office, which can greatly boost your efficiency. 2. Have goals that fascinate you. No matter how hard you work, if you're not particularly fascinated by the task, you are not likely to perform well. In fact, your interest level may be among the biggest keys to accomplishing success, according to research from Duke University. A high level of interest optimizes your performance and keeps you deeply engaged. It's also crucial to feel like the task you're finishing is meaningful. If you see what you're doing as crucial, you're more likely to use the self-control needed to keep going, even when you feel awkward. Delegate boring tasks. Find ways to outsource projects that you're not enthusiastic about, and develop little objectives that will keep you mindful throughout the workday to stay as efficient as possible. 3. Lower the work-home dispute. Without the appropriate living style balance, you run the risk of experiencing a major dip in performance. When you feel stressed out about the demands of work and home, you are more likely to end up being mentally exhausted and depressed, according to a research study published in the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medication. Researchers also found a rather direct link between the work-home conflict and job burnout. Proactively develop a healthy work-life balance. Set limits on your willingness to work from home during night hours, or take breaks away from technology or screens. Engage in stress-eliminating activities like exercise and meditation to optimize your workplace performance. 4. Practice gratitude. When you are so busy that you don't feel like you have some time to think of anything besides work, take time to practice gratitude. Acknowledge all that you have to be thankful for and express thanks to your workers, managers, and business associates alike. Research shows that appreciation increases your ability to tension, reduces physical health concerns, and produces an overall increased satisfaction with life, all things that can definitely help enhance your work environment efficiency. Not only can gratitude make you more productive, but it can also make the people around you more productive. A study by the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania learned that when bosses thanked employees for their hard work, their expression of appreciation activated a 50% boost in productivity. Work smarter. There's a Zen saying that says you should sit in meditation for 20 minutes every day, unless you're too busy. Then you should sit for an hour. In today's fast-paced world, it's hard to find some time for healthy routines, but slowing down can actually accelerate your efficiency. Small lifestyle changes can go a long way to helping you work smarter and not harder. Chapter 4. Alfred Binet and his history of IQ screening. Interest in intelligence goes back thousands of years, but it was not until psychologist Alfred Binet was commissioned to recognize students who needed academic assistance that the first intelligence ratio IQ test was born. While it has its restrictions, and it has many lookalikes that use far less rigorous measurements, Binet's IQ test is widely known everywhere as a way to compare intelligence. History. During the early 1900s, the French government asked Binet to help decide which students were most likely to experience trouble in school. The federal government had passed laws requiring that all French kids participate in school, so it was essential to find a way to identify children who would really need specific help. Binet and his colleague, Theodore Simon, began developing questions that fixated on areas not obviously taught in school, such as attention, memory, and problem-solving abilities. Using these questions, Binet determined which ones acted as the best predictors of school success. He rapidly realized that some kids had the ability to answer more advanced questions that older kids were normally able to answer, and vice versa. Based upon this observation, Binet suggested the concept of psychological age, or a measure of intelligence based on the typical capabilities of kids of a certain age. The first IQ test. The first intelligence test, described today as the Binet-Simon scale, became the basis for the intelligence tests still in use today. Yet Binet himself did not believe that his psychometric instruments could be used to gauge a single, irreversible, and inborn level of intelligence. Binet emphasized the limitations of the test, suggesting that intelligence is far too broad a principle to quantify with a single number. Rather, he insisted that intelligence is influenced by many elements, that it changes gradually, and that it can only be compared in kids with comparable backgrounds. Stanford-Binet Intelligence Test. When the Binet-Simon scale was given in the United States, it created considerable interest. Stanford University psychologist Louis Terman took Binet's original test and standardized it using a sample of American participants. That adapted test, first published in 1916, was called the Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scale and soon became the basic intelligence test used in the USA. The Stanford-Binet Intelligence Test used a single number referred to as the intelligence ratio, or IQ, to represent a person's score on the test. The Stanford-Binet remains a popular assessment tool today, regardless of going through certain revisions for many years since its creation. The IQ score was determined by dividing the test taker's psychological age by his or her chronological age, and then multiplying this number by 100. For instance, a child with a mental age of 12 and a chronological age of 10 would have an IQ of 120. 12 divided by 10 times 100. Benefits and drawbacks of IQ screening. At the outset of World War I, United States Army authorities were faced with the job of screening a massive number of employees. In 1917, as chair of the Committee on the Psychological Examination of Recruits, psychologist Robert Yerkes developed two tests known as the Army Alpha and Beta tests. The Army Alpha was created as a composed test, while the Army Beta was comprised of pictures for recruits who were not able to read or didn't speak English. The tests were administered to over 2 million fighters in an effort to help the Army determine which men were fit to specific positions and leadership roles. After the war, the tests stayed in use in a variety of situations outside of the military. For example, IQ tests were used to screen new immigrants as they went into the United States. The results of these tests were sadly used to make sweeping and inaccurate generalizations about whole populations, which led some intelligence specialists to exhort Congress to enact immigration restrictions. Wechsler Intelligence Scales. Going even further with the concept of the Stanford-Binet test, American psychologist David Wechsler created a new measurement instrument. Similar to Binet, Wechsler actually believed that intelligence included different brain powers. Dissatisfied with the restrictions of the Stanford-Binet, he released his new intelligence test known as the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, or WAIS, in 1955. Wechsler also developed two different tests particularly for use with children, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, WISC, and the Wechsler Preschool and Main Scale of Intelligence, or WPPSI. The adult variation of the test has been revised since its original publication and is now known as the WAIS-4. WAIS-4. The WAIS-4 contains 10 subtests, along with 5 additional tests. The test offers scores in 4 major areas of intelligence: a spoken understanding scale, a perceptual reasoning scale, a working memory scale, and a processing speed scale. The test even offers 2 broad scores that can be used as a synopsis of overall intelligence. The full-blown IQ score integrates performance on all 4 index scores, and the General Ability Index is based on 6 subtest scores. Subtest scores on the WAIS-4 can be helpful in determining learning impairments, such as cases where a low rating in some parts, combined with a high rating in other areas, could suggest that the individual has a specific learning trouble. Rather than scoring the test based on sequential age and mental age, the WAIS is scored by comparing the test taker's score to the scores of others in the same age. The typical rating is fixed at 100. with 2/3 of scores depending on the normal variety between 85 and 115. That scoring approach has become the basic method in intelligence screening and is also used in the modern revision of the Stanford-Binet test. Chapter 5. The Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. The Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, WAIS, is an intelligence test first released in 1955 and designed to gauge intelligence in adults and older adolescents. The test was designed by the psychologist David Wechsler, who actually believed that intelligence was made up of certain different mental abilities rather than a single general intelligence aspect. History. Wechsler was disappointed with what he actually believed were the limitations of the Stanford-Binet intelligence test. Amongst his chief problems about that test was the single score that emerged, its focus on timed jobs, and the fact that the test had been created particularly for children and was thus invalid for grown-ups. As a result, Wechsler created a new test during the 1930s, known as the Wechsler-Bellevue Intelligence Scales. The test was later revised and ended up being called the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, or WAIS. WAIS versus Stanford-Binet. One fascinating thing to note is that Alfred Binet, the designer of the world's first intelligence test, also actually believed that intelligence was far too complicated to be based and sufficiently described by a single number. The goal of his original test was to help recognize kids who needed specialized help in school, and he felt that a variety of individual elements, including but not limited to a child's level of motivation, could influence test scores. In a sense, Wechsler's test was a return to many of the ideas that Binet had also upheld. Rather than giving a single general score, the WAIS provided a profile of the test taker's overall strengths and weak points. One advantage of this method is that the pattern of scores can also offer beneficial information. An example could be this: scoring high in certain parts but low in others might indicate the presence of a certain learning handicap. Like the conventional Stanford-Binet test, the WAIS also provides a general score. Having said that, Wechsler used a completely different approach to computing this number. As you might remember from reading about the history of intelligence screening, scores on the early Stanford-Binet were stemmed from dividing mental age by chronological age. On the WAIS, Wechsler instead compared scores of the test taker to those of others in his or her general age. The typical rating is fixed at 100, with around 2/3 of all scores falling somewhere between 85 and 115. Test scores that fall between these two numbers are considered average, regular intelligence. Most other intelligence tests later chose to adopt Wechsler's approach, including but not limited to the modern version of the Stanford-Binet. Chapter 6. Are people with high IQs more effective? While it could be natural to assume that those with incredibly high IQs have a flair for success, from Jay Gatsby in The Great Gatsby to Lex Luthor in the Superman comics, we have come to associate being super rich with being super smart. Even President Donald Trump has claimed to have an IQ that is one of the greatest in a well-publicized 2013 tweet, suggesting that his wealth was somehow connected to his intelligence. However, for every person we ascribe as genius, there are just as many like Nobel Prize laureate John Nash, of a brilliant mind popularity, and mathematician Kurt Gödel, who fought with mental illness and personal crises. In fact, some research indicates a connection between high intelligence and mental health problems. When crunching the hard numbers, is there any real evidence that an IQ can anticipate anything about a person's possibility of success, whether it be monetary, scholastic, or creative? Comprehending IQ tests. The very first IQ tests were designed to recognize school children in need of additional scholastic help. In time, that intention was flipped, and the tests quickly transformed into a means to identify individuals who had higher intelligence than the average. On a standardized examination, such as the Stanford-Binet test, the average IQ score is 100. Anything above 140 is considered a high or genius level IQ. It is approximated that between 0.25% and 1% of the population fall into this elite category. Terman's research study of the gifted. With the development of IQ screening, scientists started to analyze whether higher tests affected anything more than a person's scholastic success. In the early 1920s, psychologist Lewis Terman started to investigate the emotional and social development skills of kids with a genius-level IQ. Basing his study in California, Terman chose 1,500 kids between the ages of 8 and 12 who together had an average IQ of 150. Of these, 80 had scored over 170. Over the next few years, Terman continued to track the children and realized that most were socially and physically well adjusted. Not only were they academically effective, but they also tended to be much healthier, more powerful, taller, and less accident-prone than a matched set of kids with normal IQs. After Terman's death in 1956, other psychologists chose to continue the research, dubbed the Terman Study of the Gifted. The research study continues to this day and is the longest-running longitudinal study in history. Connection of intelligence and accomplishment. Amongst some of the original individuals of the Terman study was famed academic psychologist Lee Cronbach, I Love Lucy author Jess Oppenheimer, kid psychologist Robert Sears, researcher Ansel Keys, and over 50 others who had since become professors at institutions of higher learnings. When looking at the group as a whole, Terman reported the average income of Terman's subjects in 1955 was an impressive $33,000, contrasted with a nationwide average of $5,000. Two-thirds had earned college degrees, while a great deal had gone on to get postgraduate and professional degrees. A lot of these had become doctors, attorneys, business executives, and scientists. As outstanding as these results seemed, the success stories seemed more the exception than the rule. In his own assessment, Terman noted that most subjects pursued occupations as modest as those of policeman, seaman, typist, and filing clerk, and finally concluded that intelligence and accomplishment were far from perfectly correlated. Personality type and success. Academic Melita Oden, who carried on Terman's research after his death, decided to compare the 100 most successful subjects, Group A, to the 100 least successful, Group C. While they essentially had the same IQ levels, those in Group C only earned partially above the typical salary of the time and had higher rates of alcohol addiction and divorce than people in Group A. According to Oden, the variation was explained in big part by the psychological characteristics of the groups. Those in Group A tended to display prudence and forethought, determination, and the desire to stand out. Moreover, as grown-ups, they exhibited three crucial characteristics not seen in most Group C subjects: goal orientation, self-esteem, and determination. This suggests that while IQ can contribute in life success, characteristics stay the identifying feature in actualizing that success. Criticism of the Terman research study. While the findings of the Terman research study were engaging, they are often criticized for omitting elements that may have added to an individual's success or failure. This included the impact of the Great Depression and the Second World War on an individual's academic achievement and gender politics, which limited the professional potential customers of women. Other scientists have since suggested that any arbitrarily chosen group of children with similar backgrounds would have been just as effective as Terman's original subjects. What this tells us: one thing that IQ scores can reliably forecast is a person's scholastic success in school. Research also suggests that people with high intelligence have a tendency to be more effective at work as well. However, in many cases, it may just be the opposite. As a matter of fact, some research studies have suggested that kids with extraordinary academic abilities could be more vulnerable to depression and social seclusion than less gifted peers. Another discovered that the ones with higher IQs were more likely to smoke cannabis and use controlled substances. One explanation for this, according to the researchers, was a personality type referred to as openness to experience. That characteristic is just one of the key character measurements described in the huge 5 theory of character. Openness is a characteristic that basically removes unconscious barriers that would otherwise prevent an individual from experiences considered socially undesirable. In addition, it is reasonably associated with creativeness, intelligence, and knowledge. By contrast, being closed to experience is more connected with routine, traditional conduct, and a narrower set of interests. Chapter 7. Can you change your personality? Is it really possible to change your character, or are our standard personality patterns repaired throughout life? While self-help books and sites typically promote plans you can follow to change your routines and behaviors, there is a relentless belief that our underlying characters are impervious to change. The Austrian psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud suggested that personality was largely set in stone by the tender age of 5. Even many modern-day psychologists suggest that general character is reasonably fixed and stable throughout life. Though, what if you want to change your personality? Can the right approach and consistent effort result in real personality change? Or are we stuck with undesirable characteristics that hold us back from attaining our goals? Is personality long-term? The desire to alter character is not uncommon. Shy people might wish they were more outgoing and talkative. Hot-tempered individuals might wish they could keep their cool in emotionally charged circumstances. At many points in your life, you may find that there are certain aspects of your personality that you wish you could change. You may even set goals and pursue taking on those potentially troublesome traits. This is an example. It is rather common to set New Year's resolutions fixated on changing parts of your character, like becoming more generous, kind, patient, or outbound. In a general sense, most of the professionals concur that materializing and long-lasting changes to broad qualities can be extremely difficult. So if you happen to be dissatisfied with certain elements of your personality, is there really anything you can do to change? Some specialists, including psychologist Carol Dweck, believe that changing the behavior patterns, routines, and beliefs that lie under the surface area of the broad qualities, or introversion, agreeableness, is the real key to character change. The factors that form a personality. To comprehend whether personality can be changed, we should first understand what exactly causes character. The age-old nature versus nurture dispute once again enters into play. Is personality shaped by our genes, nature, or by our upbringing, experiences, and environment, nurture? In the past, theorists and philosophers often took a one versus the other method and promoted either for the value of nature or nurture. But today, most thinkers would agree that it is a mixture of the two forces that ultimately form our characters. Not just that, but the constant interaction between genes and the environment can help form how personality is expressed. This is an example. You could be genetically predisposed to being friendly and laid back, but operating in a high-stress environment might lead you to be more short-fused and uptight than you could be in a completely different setting. Dweck relates a story of identical twin brothers separated after birth and raised apart. As adults, the two guys married women with the exact same given names, shared comparable hobbies, and had similar levels of certain characteristics gauged on character evaluations. It is such examples that offer the basis for the idea that our personalities are mainly out of our control, rather than being shaped by our environment and special experiences. These twin studies point to the power of hereditary impacts. Genetics is certainly essential, but other research studies also show that our childhood and even our society communicate with our hereditary blueprints to shape who we are. Focusing on the in-betweens of personality might be key, but Dweck suggests that personality change is still possible. Broad traits may be steady through life, but Dweck actually believes that it is our in-between qualities that lie under the surface area of the broad qualities that are the most essential in making us who we are. It is those in-between qualities, she believes, that can be changed. So just what are these in-between parts of personality? Beliefs and belief systems, Dweck proposes, play a vital role in forming personality right below the level of the broad traits. While changing certain aspects of your personality may be challenging, you can realistically deal with changing some of the underlying beliefs that help shape and control how your character is uttered. Other theorists have suggested that elements like goals and coping methods play a primary role in identifying personality. For example, while you might have more of a type A personality, you can learn new coping skills and stress management techniques that help you end up being a more relaxed person. Quote, "People's beliefs include their mental representations of the nature and workings of the self, of their relationships, and of their world. From infancy, humans develop these beliefs and representations, and many prominent personality theorists of different persuasions acknowledge that they are a basic part of character." End quote. Dweck clarified in a 2008 paper. Why focus on beliefs? While changing beliefs might not always be simple, it offers a very good beginning point. Our beliefs form so much of our lives, from how we view ourselves and others, how we operate in daily life, how we deal with life's challenges, and how we create connections with others. If we can produce real change in our beliefs, it is a thing which might have a resounding influence on our behaviors, and possibly on certain aspects of our personality. Take, for example, beliefs about the self, including whether personal attributes and attributes are repaired or malleable. If you believe your intelligence is a fixed level, then you are not likely to take steps to deepen your thinking. If, however, you view such qualities as adjustable, you'll likely make a higher effort to challenge yourself and expand your mind. Clearly, beliefs about the self do play a rather critical role in how people operate, but researchers have found out that people can change their beliefs to take a more malleable method to self-attributes. In one experiment, students had a higher gratitude of academics, higher grade point averages, and a greater general enjoyment of school after discovering that the brain continues to form new connections in reaction to new knowledge. Dweck's own research has shown that how children are applauded can have an influence on their self-beliefs. Those who are praised for their intelligence tend to hold fixed theory beliefs about their own personal qualities. Those children see their intelligence as an unchangeable quality. You either have it or you do not. Kids who are praised for their efforts, on the other hand, usually see their intelligence as malleable. Those kids, Dweck has found, tend to persist in the face of difficulty and are more eager to learn. So, what can you actually do to change your personality? Changing from an introvert to an extrovert could be very hard and even impossible, but there are things that the specialists believe you can do to make real and enduring changes to aspects of your character. Focus on changing your practices. Psychologists have discovered that people who display positive personality types, such as generosity and sincerity, have developed regular reactions that have stuck. Habits can be learned, so changing your regular reactions in time is one way to create character change. Naturally, forming a new practice or breaking an old one is never ever easy, and it takes time and serious effort. With enough practice, these new patterns of behavior will ultimately become second nature. Change your self-beliefs. If you believe you cannot change, then you won't change. If you are attempting to become more outbound, but you believe that your introversion is a fixed, irreversible, and unchangeable quality, then you will just never ever try to end up being more sociable. Still, if you believe that your personal characteristics are adjustable, you are more likely to make an effort to become more gregarious. Focus on the process. Dweck's research has consistently revealed that applauding efforts rather than capability is important. Rather than thinking, "I'm so clever," or "I'm so skilled," replace such expressions with, "I worked actually hard," or "I found a great way of solving that problem." By shifting to more of a development frame of mind instead of a repaired frame of mind, you might find that it is much easier to experience real change and development. Fake it till you make it. Positive psychologist Christopher Peterson realized early on that his introverted character may have a detrimental impact on his career as a scholastic. To overcome this, he decided to start acting extroverted in circumstances that called for it, like when providing a lecture to a class loaded with students or giving a discussion at a conference. Ultimately, these habits just became second nature. While he suggested that he was still an introvert, he learned how to become extroverted when he needed to be. Personality change may not be simple, and changing some broad characteristics may never ever actually be completely possible. However, researchers do believe that there are things you can do to change certain parts of your character. The elements that exist below the level of those broad characteristics that can lead to real changes by the way you act, think, and function in your day-to-day life. Chapter 8. The Big 5 Traits. Most of the contemporary personality psychologists actually think that there are 5 standard measurements of character, usually described as the huge 5 characteristics. The 5 broad personality types described by the principle are extroversion, also often spelled extroversion, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. Characteristic theories of personality have long attempted to determine precisely how many personality types exist. Earlier theories have suggested a different number of possible traits, which includes Gordon Allport's list of 4,000 personality types, Raymond Cattell's 16 personality aspects, and Hans Eysank's 3-factor theory. However, many scientists felt that Cattell's concept was too complicated and Eysank's was too limited in scope. As a result, the 5-factor concept emerged to specify the important qualities that function as the foundation of character. What are the huge 5 measurements of personality? Today, many researchers believe that they are 5 core characteristics. Evidence of this idea has been growing for many years, beginning with the research of D.W. Fisk, 1949, and later expanded on by other scientists, including Norman, 1967, Smith, also 1967, Goldberg, 1981, and McRae and Costa, 1987. The huge 5 are broad categories of personality types. While there is a significant body of literature supporting this 5-factor model of personality, scientists don't always settle on the exact labels for such measurement. You may find it valuable to use the acronym OCEAN: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, when trying to remember the huge 5 traits. CANO, for conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, and extroversion, is another commonly used acronym. It is essential to note that each of the 5 character elements represents a variety between 2 extremes. An example could be this: Extroversion represents a continuum between severe extroversion and extreme introversion. In the real world, the majority of people lie someplace in between the two polar ends of each measurement. These 5 classifications are generally described as follows. Openness. This trait includes characteristics such as creativity and insight. People who are high in this trait also tend to have a broad range of interests. They wander about the world and other people and are excited to learn new things and enjoy new experiences. Those who are high in this trait have a tendency to be more daring and creative. Many people low in this trait are often far more conventional and may deal with abstract thinking. High, extremely creative, open to trying new things, fixated on dealing with new challenges, happy to think about abstract ideas. Low, dislikes change, does not enjoy new things, resists new ideas, not very creative, dislikes abstract or theoretical ideas. Conscientiousness. Requirement features of this dimension include high levels of consideration, good impulse control, and goal-directed behaviors. Highly conscientious people have a tendency to be organized and mindful of details. They prepare ahead, think of how their behavior influences others, and bear in mind deadlines. High, hangs out preparing, finishes essential jobs right away, focuses on detail, is enjoying having actually a set schedule. Low, dislikes structure and schedules, makes messes and doesn't look after things, fails to return things or put them back where they belong, procrastinates important tasks, fails to complete necessary or appointed jobs. Extroversion. Extroversion, or extroversion, is characterized by excitability, sociability, talkativeness, assertiveness, and high amounts of psychological expressiveness. Most people who are high in extroversion are outgoing and tend to gain energy in social situations. Being around other people helps them feel energized and excited. People who are low in extroversion or introverted have a tendency to be more reserved and have less energy to expend on social settings. Social events can feel like draining pipes, and introverts often require a period of solitude and quiet in order to recharge. High, enjoys being the center of attention, likes to start conversations, enjoys meeting new people, has a large social circle of friends and acquaintances, finds it easy to make new good friends, feels energized when around others, says things before thinking about them. Low, prefers solitude, feels exhausted when having to interact socially a lot, finds it hard to start conversations, dislikes making small talk, thoroughly thinks things through before speaking, dislikes being the center of attention. Agreeableness. This character measurement includes attributes such as trust, altruism, compassion, love, and other prosocial behaviors. Many people who are high in agreeableness have a tendency to be more cooperative, while those low in this characteristic have the tendency to be more competitive and, in some cases, even manipulative. High has a good deal of interest in other individuals, cares about others, feels empathy and concern for other people, enjoys helping and adding to the happiness of other individuals, assists others who need help. Low, takes little interest in others, doesn't care about how other people feel, has little interest in other individuals' issues, insults and belittles others, controls others to get what they want. Neuroticism. Neuroticism is a characteristic identified by unhappiness, bad moods, and mental illness. The people who are high in this trait tend to experience mood swings, anxiety, irritability, and unhappiness. Those low in this trait tend to be more stable and mentally durable. High experiences a lot of tension, stress over many different things, gets upset quickly, experiences significant shifts in mood, feels restless, battles to get better after demanding events. Low, mentally stable, deals well with stress, hardly ever feels sad or depressed, does not worry much, is really relaxed. Are the huge 5 traits universal? McCrae and his colleagues have also found out that the big 5 qualities are also remarkably universal. One study that looked at people from more than 50 different societies found that the 5 dimensions could be accurately used to specify character. Based upon this research, many psychologists now believe that the 5 personality measurements are not only universal, they also have biological origins. Psychologist David Buss has proposed an evolutionary clarification for these 5 core personality traits, suggesting that these characteristics represent the most essential qualities that shape our social landscape. What factors influence the big 5 traits? Research suggests that both natural and ecological impacts play a role in shaping our character. Twin studies suggest that both nature and nurture contribute in the development of each of the 5 personality factors. One study of the genetic and environmental underpinnings of the 5 traits looked at 123 sets of twins and 127 pairs of fraternal twins. The discovery suggested that the heritability of each trait was 53% for extroversion, 41% for agreeableness, 44% for conscientiousness, 41% for neuroticism, and 61% for openness. Longitudinal studies also suggest that these huge 5 personality traits have a tendency to be fairly steady throughout adulthood. One study of working-age grown-ups realized that personality tended to be steady over a 4-year period and displayed little change as a consequence of unfavorable life events. Research studies have shown that maturation could have an impact on the 5 characteristics. As people age, they tend to become less extroverted, less unstable, and less open to the experience. Agreeableness and conscientiousness, on the other hand, tend to increase as people get older. Always remember that conduct involves an interaction between a person's underlying personality and situational variables. The circumstance that an individual finds himself or herself in plays a major role in how the individual responds. However, in most cases, people offer responses that are consistent with their underlying personality types. These measurements represent broad parts of personality. Research has shown that these groupings of characteristics tend to take place together in lots of people. For instance, individuals who are sociable have the tendency to be talkative, yet these traits do not always take place together. Personality is complicated and varied, and everyone might display habits across numerous of these measurements. This has been Intelligence, Personalities, Traits, and Ways to Work Smarter, written by Jason Hendrickson, narrated by Alex Lancer, copyright 2020, all rights reserved.